Welcome everybody to today's webcast, Why Most Law Firms Suck at Intake and How Yours Can Do Better. This is Bob Ambrogi. I'm going to be the moderator today. I am a lawyer in Massachusetts and also a columnist at Above the Law, which is producing today's webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Alert Communications. And I'm really excited about this topic because I can tell you, I've certainly seen from my own experience that the statement is true that many law firms do suck at intake. And I've seen the presentation we're going to cover today, and I think you're going to really learn a lot of valuable information that's going to be helpful to you. I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, I know a lot of people often ask afterward whether they'll be able to receive the presentation. You will get a follow-up email at some point after the presentation from Alert Communications, the sponsor of the program today, and they will provide the slides to you after the fact. Also, the recording of this presentation will continue to be available to you afterwards at the link that you used to log in today. Regarding questions, I just want to let you know that there is a Q&A box that you'll see on the platform down in the lower left-hand corner, and that is where you can enter any questions that you have for us today. We will leave time at the end of the program for questions and answers, but if you have a question as we're going through the program, go ahead and feel free to enter it in there. I will be monitoring that throughout the program. And if there's something that kind of just can't wait or that's particularly timely to what we're talking about at any given moment in the program, we'll try and take some of those before we reach the end of the program. Other than that, we're going to be going at a pretty quick pace through here, so we'll try and leave time for a little more discussion at the end of the program. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce and then turn it over to the person who is going to be the principal speaker today, and that is Tom Ball, who is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Alert Communications, and Tom is going to be guiding you through today's program. So Tom, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that, and it's nice to be here. So we're going to kind of charge forward. I'll give you a little background. Alert Communications is a dedicated legal intake call center, but also does a lot of other solutions for law firms as well. This is all we do. We have about 450 employees. We're in California in a 55,000 square foot facility, which we have evacuated due to COVID-19, and now everybody is working from home. But I just wanted to bring you up. My background is really working with sales teams and helping companies become more efficient. I've worked for 2 multi-billion-dollar companies that have 25 and 80,000 employees, and what we try to do here is help law firms basically make sure that they actually process leads like a really strong sales team should, and really address the issues that address within them. And I think today what we want to do is talk about the mission. And the mission really is that this following course will provide insight on how to ask hard questions about your intake team and systems to identify the possibilities for improvement, to achieve far better results internally, or to outsource to fix these. When applied and intake is optimized, your law firm revenue will increase. Marketing campaigns will be measurable and succeed, and your law firms and potential clients' frustrations will greatly decrease. And that's a lot to say, but it's true. Fixing this part of it. So let's kind of charge into this and let's take a look at a couple things. So in the general business strategy today, when you really look at any company, and it doesn't really matter if it's Ford or Corona Beer or basically your office, you really have the company and the product, and you have sales, and you have marketing, those 3 pieces. But in a law firm, it looks like this. This is the law firm business strategy. Now, this is the macro level. We'll dive into the minutia on this a little bit later. But you really have the law firm or the specific litigation that you're involved with on a daily basis. You have effective marketing that you must have, and then you have 24 intake. But 24 intake is sales. And when you start to look at your intake department as a sales department, even though you don't call it intake, and you can't call it an intake department to obviously potential clients as well, it's not appropriate. So it's not a sales department when you're talking to people, but it is a sales department. Things start to change for you. So let's talk about Did you know that consumer expectations have changed? Now, let's talk about what's really driven that. What's really driven that is a couple of things. And you can look at these top 5 companies at the bottom. Amazon, who really is the major market leader, and you can tell by their revenue and growth, why have they gotten to how large they are? It's not just their model, but it's also customer service, and they're superb. I had a problem the other day with Amazon, called them up, they picked up the phone, resolved it on the phone with me instantaneously. Ranked number 2 is Walmart, then it's Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. But what has changed? Well, consumers now expect this from everybody they talk to. They expect customer service. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner here, with chat, if they chat with you, they expect you to respond now. You have less than 1 minute to respond. With texting, you have 4 to 5 minutes to respond if they're using it as a method to communicate within business. On the phone, you only have, they don't want to wait 5 to 6 minutes. And in the legal world, we think that's actually not even true. We actually think it's much shorter than that. Social media, you have 35 minutes to respond if somebody pings you on social media. And an email, 3 to 4 minutes. That's it. And you have to ask yourself, how are we doing as a law firm when people want to communicate with us, not even before we actually sign them and bring them on as a client, but also afterwards, okay? But we're going to be talking mainly about intake on that side, which is actually at the beginning. So take a look at this, that at the bottom, how have the customer expectations changed as well? Well, 74% of customers basically base their purchase and decisions on customer service. And how you react to all these emails, text, communications, follow-up, from the very beginning, from the very first time you talk to them all the way through, is whether they're going to recommend you or not, or even want to stay with you as a client. And you grow on 2 sides in a law firm. You grow basically on the first side with marketing and bringing new people in, and on the second side with those clients loving you and referring you to other clients and having that business. So ask yourself, how are your customer service expectations being met? And what do really, on the other side of that, what do your clients think about you with your reviews and so forth? Are you meeting this or are you not? So let's talk about what's the problem. Well, this is what the problem could be. So do you know if this is your issue? Lost leads, lost clients, lost referrals, and lost revenue? Do you even know if this is your issue? So at a conference recently that I was at, which is Mass Torts Made Perfect, I was speaking to an audience of about 600 attorneys, and I asked 2 questions. The first question basically was, how many of you know what your conversions are for all your leads? And about 1/3 of the audience raised their hand. So that alone is stunning, but about 1/3 of the audience. And I asked another question, which is the bomb. And the bomb question was this: how many of you know how many leads you've lost on any given month? And how many people raised their hand in that audience? Not a single person. So the people that actually raised their hand that said they knew conversions that don't know that answer, that's not the truth. You have to know how many leads you've actually lost as well to know what your conversions are, which means you have to patch all the holes in your intake to recognize every lead flowing into your law firm. So you must know this issue if you're losing leads. So do you regularly evaluate your intake process? The critical starting point is, are you open to all changes that cause improvement? The reason why that's so critical is many law firms that we consult with at the beginning, and we just talk to them about this, and they start to ask us about how we can help them. We just basically ask them, we start to find out very, very soon if there are protective silos within a law firm that are being protected, or they're protecting themselves because maybe they're not really on top of this position, because this is a hard thing to do in a law firm. And one thing I want to recognize as we talk about legal intake, especially 24/7 legal intake and dealing with leads 24/7, is how difficult this is. Should you evaluate yourself? Do you know how many leads you are losing? We're asking that question again because it's so critical. And what is your plan to improve initial client experiences and convert more leads? And is your current plan, or has it been, to just go ahead and spend more on marketing to spin your way through the problems. So if you don't know the answers to these questions, you're not alone. So let's address some of these issues. So do you have super intake? And super intakes mean is your team, your super intake team, is it a super sales team? Is it being managed correctly? So do you have 24/7 intake experts and proper bandwidth? Excellent intake screening criteria and scripts? Do you have 24/7 intake sales managers that are overlooking this department that actually have the ability to do it? Because the common mistake basically is that there's unqualified, untrained staff in intake or even in sales. Happens all the time. The next available person takes the call. They're not talking to somebody that was actually about a certain thing that has to do with your law firm, and they're not prepared, or their tone is not right because they're impatient because they're rushing. Remember, multitasking lowers conversions. We know that for sure. Prospective client must be priority number one. So optimizing all facets of legal intake optimizes your marketing investment, because now you know what's going on about leads being lost or not, as well as the fact every single lead is being talked to in a timely manner. And what the result becomes is more clients for less marketing spend. And I think that's the goal really for every business on the planet, is that more clients for less marketing spend. So, Bob, were you going to ask a question? No. So do
yeah, sorry, I was.
know
sorry, Tom, I did actually just want to ask really quickly. And just, I mean, I think one of the things I think that a lot of firms don't think about, and I wonder if you have any insight on this, is what happens to those leads you lose. I mean, what's a client? You know, I've talked to a lot of potential clients who say they go online, they're looking for a lawyer, they call a firm, they don't get a response. What do? They move on to the next firm, right? I mean, it's not like they're going to call you back the next day and give you another chance. That's a lost opportunity, right?
It is. And I think it's a super good question that we're going to cover here in a minute as well again, but I think I'm going to answer it now. What happens is that if you're not responding to your leads in a timely manner, which is what we're going to talk about right now, then what happens is your marketing dollars, you're actually marketing for your competitor law firms because they're going to respond. Somebody's going to respond before you, and the first person that does that basically is the person that's going to win if they can handle that effectively. So that's what you're doing. It's not just that you lost the lead. You really actually spent the marketing money to go to your competition. And then they get the referrals as well. Great question, Bob. So the other, what that leads to is, do you know your lead response timing and quality? Because this is so critical. Now, what we have found basically this. Now, you have to ask yourself about your intake department. Does your lead response and intake do this? And these are the really critical things. One, instant response to all leads 24/7, 365 with experts. So most people that are on the phone and basically listening to this are going to say, no, we don't have that. We can do it part of the day, but it's not always an expert, and sometimes it's not the right person on the phone, or we're too busy. But the instant response is virtually impossible for us. We don't really have the systems or the people that can do that. And then two, do you do this? Once you have the client on the phone and you're talking to them, can you stop them from shopping with quality intake and using technology systems? Now, the reason why that's so critical is both of these things is those two pieces are what really fix the problem. Now, is it complicated? Yes, because the magic formula is a pretty robust mixture of 24/7 inbound calls answered in 3 rings or less with hold times under 15 seconds always. Web leads require instant outbound texts, calls, and emails with multiple attempts if you don't reach them on the first time, and follow-up to go with that. And if you do that, you get double the amount of people off those leads into live intake, and that you can turn into clients. And then be able to convert them to a signed client without breaking contact. So there's a lot. That's the magic formula that you have to build in to make these number 1 and number 2 work. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So let's talk about how critical is lead response time. So many times when we get law firms on the phone, we talk to them and say, hey, I just want to ask you a question. If a web lead comes into you and it comes in at 9 p.m. on Friday night, when do you respond? And often, and I'd probably say 75 to 80% of the time, they will tell me we either call them the next day or we call them on Monday. So let's talk about that a little bit. What you need to know is a couple things about lead response time. Do you know your hold times? We know, because we actually do millions of intakes per year. We have 450 people here. We're the largest at what we do in the nation, and we measure and we have all this data. We know that over 15 seconds on hold, what happens basically is people abandon the call and you lose the lead, and they just end up calling some other law firm. Do you have overflow, which means that if you don't pick up the call in 15 seconds or after 3 rings, do you overflow that to an outsourced company like what we do? Or do you have somebody that will do that to actually handle that after 3 rings? Now, we actually put a message there, which means that when people use overflow systems with us, after 3 rings, they put a message, thank you for calling ABC Law Firm. We promise we're going to be right with you. And then it rings to the overflow, which happens to be us, and we actually do the process for them. There's no wait time. Wait time is deadly for leads, and hold time as well. Do you know what your law firm's average ring answer time is for calls? Over 3 rings. If it keeps on ringing, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, usually about 4, 5, and 6, they get a little. If you have about 6.8 seconds per ring, people start to get impatient, and it just after about the 4th, 5th, 6th ring, people think you're closed, and you may be, and they can also hang up and move on. Those are lost leads that you don't even know you're losing. Do you know how fast your team responds to web leads? So qualifying web forms and landing pages, chat, anything that's coming through that's a web lead really requires instant texting with automation, meaning that you have a software system that does that. And then it prompts other things, which means a live call. So you really only have 1 to 3 minutes outbound call response time, which is ideal. After about 1 to 3 minutes, maximum 5 minutes, lead loss becomes significant. And we have data on that, which we'll show you. So let's take a look at this, how critical it is. Look at this in the first 5 minutes, how many people were reached in a certain lead pool. And actually, that the odds of making contract decreases over 5 times in just the first 5 minutes. This is how much time you have. And if you look at the delta between the 10 minutes and 5 minutes, that long bar, what happened to all those leads you couldn't reach? They just went to your competition. That's where they went. So that's the speed. So this is about live people, 24/7, as well as about software making this work. In this situation, these are how many leads that actually became qualified, and this is just the data showing that after 12,700 basically people were contacted in the first hour, but contacting the same pool of leads, in 2 hours, only 1,190 were reached. So basically the odds of making contact increased over 10 times in the first hour. Now, this is even more critical with certain types of practices, with personal injury, with criminal law, things that people have to talk to people right now, maybe even sometimes immigration, that if you don't respond even faster, the chance of you losing them and those critical type of things when it's 24/7. This is how the chance of you actually losing your leads and then moving forward. Now, this is actually a Harvard business study that talks about firms that tried contacting leads within 1 hour were nearly 7 times more likely to qualify leads versus those who waited 2 hours. Now, this is the 1 hour delta. Let me tell you the problem with this study, because I think our study is deeper than theirs because we do so much of this. This only really measures how many leads led to a meaningful conversation with a key decision maker. This is not tracking actual conversions from lead to client. So what happens, what I mean by that is that you may reach somebody in after an hour, but I can almost guarantee you that in your marketplace there are people that are set up to respond to leads. They could even be using us to help them to respond to leads, that have responded in the first 5 or 10 or 15 minutes to these people before you even get to them an hour. So if you get to them within an hour and they pick up the phone, doesn't mean you get them as a client because they're already gone. Somebody has already worked out a way to work with them. So that's why it's so critical that you have a 5-minute and 5-minute sub-program in place. Now let's just talk about, do you have a fast and expert intake response for all of these sources? So you have inbound calls. And inbound calls are critical because answering in 3 rings is a challenge in a law firm. And then you have social media that you may be out there working with your marketing department. And then you have referrals coming in that require responses to. You may have people that are outreach and business development gathering leads to you, and they may be getting responses by email and other ways that you may not or may be responding too slow to. Physical ads, which could be billboards or other things, website visitors, and email marketing, all of these things. And so ask yourself, do you have a fast and expert intake response for all of these sources? Now remember the title of this program. The reason why most law firms don't do well or suck at intake is because there's a lot to think about. And you're focusing on your team, the lawyers, they may be focused on paralegals, support staff, focusing on marketing, but this piece is the least focused on. This is the only industry I've ever seen that focuses so little on the intake and sales department on a 24/7 basis and is willing to spend their way through it in marketing. It's totally unacceptable in most corporations to operate like that. And if you get around this, you'll realize how everything works so much better. So do you have an intake solutions in place for all lead sources? Okay, which is what we just talked about. So and when you dive into this, there's social media, pay-per-click, pay-per-call, organic SEO too. So we're even getting deeper into the type of lead sources you really need to think about. And actually, how am I going to respond to all these fast? How am I going to get an outbound live call out to these people and leave messages and then follow up and make sure I follow up on time? So that's what's so critical. Well, let's talk about what's the most critical thing that's missed. And so which one are you? And what we're talking about here is bandwidth. In a company or a law firm that is right-sized, their intake department looks like the left funnel. And that means every single lead that comes into it is actually communicated with, it's talked to. You have enough people to be able to respond to the web leads coming in, to chat leads coming in, to emails and to referrals, to take phone calls, to outbound with web leads. It is a monumental task, but it's right-sized. And we probably say, I would say maybe 2-3% of the law firms we talk to actually have this, but they only have it during work hours, not 24/7. And that's built to capture and respond to all leads, all right? Now, people say, well, I got 70% conversion. Well, do you? We responded immediately to 600 leads, and we signed 140 out of 200 qualified leads. That's 70% conversion. But you can reach 70% conversion and lose leads because you're not measuring the leads that are lost. You don't even know you lost them. So undersized means you need to hire or outsource to right size, one of the two. Or you just spin through it with marketing. But we'll talk about why that's not a good idea, because if you spin through it with marketing, it's far more expensive than hiring somebody to help you with outsourcing. Out of the 600 leads, we got 70, half of the 140 in the previous funnel, and actually signed those, but they lost 70 of those. Losing leads is the question. So bandwidth is so critical to build this out right, and then you have to be able to measure that. So when we talk about your intake team, our book, when we train people that come to work here, is probably 8 inches thick. And it takes 2-3 weeks before they even get to talk to a client. They have people looking over their shoulder and monitoring their calls. But does your intake team have these skills with ongoing training? Empathy, critical skill to have. Listening skills, legal terminology training, knowledge of the litigations they're actually representing, and that type of training, and ongoing training as it changes. Phone etiquette, call control, which means you can't let people ramble on forever if you're trying to get a point across. So you have to be able to control that, but be able to control that properly. Outbound calling, texting, and emailing skills, which is a lot different than picking up the phone and talking to people. Follow up with web forms and inbound calls that are contacted on the first, not contacted on the first call. Retainer execution, taking your fee agreements with e-sign and correct explanation and walkthrough to e-sign skills. Do they have warm and live transfer call routing, and can they do that to multi-staff and do that effectively without basically fumbling the calls? What about appointment scheduling? Can they simply schedule an appointment, and do they have a process to watch how they do that and who that appointment should go to? And then can they navigate emotional client conversations? Because this is going to happen. And those really happen a lot more in certain fields of legal, like personal injury and so forth, even sexual abuse, things like that. But can they actually work after they take that call, and do they need a break? So what does your intake team look like, and how are they being trained? Do you make a great first impression as well? The first impression is super important, the person that answers the phone. So have you standardized and maintained how leads are greeted? Because most law firms we talk to do not. They let people handle that the way they want. You must maintain consistency and then monitor the people making the calls and listen to them. You don't want people that are basically a bummer on the phone when their whole mentality. You don't want people too fast or too slow, but you want people to be polished when they answer the phone and represent your firm. That's the first touch to your firm, is that first greeting. And it's not just a standard greeting, but it's calm, empathy, instills confidence in your firm. And remember, What weakens this is multitasking. If somebody's rushing to prepare for trial, or it's a paralegal or a receptionist that's juggling calls, when they get on the phone, if they sound rushed or they sound like they don't have enough time because of other things they're doing, it all comes across as in the first impression, and those people can feel it. So they need to basically know what they're doing in this skill. Is this being managed at all within your law firm? Here's a simple statement here. This is how somebody could answer this as a really good skill. Thank you for calling ABC Law Firms. And I wanted you to know you called the right firm and we can help you. That's after they would make an initial statement of what's going on. But just something simple like that about instilling confidence. Do you have a training program for that?
Tom, before you move on, can I just ask a quick question that came up from somebody in the audience on that in that intake process? Where does the process of performing client conflict checks fit in there, and what role do you have in doing that?
I think that depends on the law firm. We actually work with the law firm, and actually that being part of the conflict check. So it depends on what they're doing. So that's customized to each law firm on how that's handled. Meaning that if we're helping a law firm and we're doing the screening and intake processes for them, a lot of times what we want to do basically is get through the first 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions that actually qualify them to be talked to at all. And maybe that conflict check is handled by the law firm. They may prefer to handle the conflict check. So it depends on what we're doing for them. Some law firms, we're signing people up for them. Like in a class action, we actually signed up 24,000 clients for a law firm under one campaign over a 3-month period. And in that situation, sometimes they will actually send a rejection letter out afterwards if they find out there's a conflict for any reason once they get deeper into it. But the key is not to lose the client, because conflicts, basically, there can be mistakes made on that as well. So the answer to it, it's customized and it's based upon the litigation, the law firm type. And we actually have so many different programs we use here. We have to kind of listen to what you want, and then we build it around what you want to do and how we can make it work and make the screening intake still move through in a smooth process. I hope that answers the question, but it's really a customized process. It's not a standard process.
Yeah, I think that answers that. And just not a related question, but something else that came out of what you were just talking about is what do you suggest in terms of how important is it for a firm to be able to handle multi-language intake? I mean, if somebody calls in and is not facile with English, should a firm be prepared to deal with that?
Well, I can just tell you for us, we have 450 people here. 112 of our agents actually can speak fluent Spanish. That's what we've committed to doing here. We have not been able to actually reach out to go into Mandarin Chinese or Korean or some of the other languages like Cambodian or some of the even Creole languages. We don't do that, but I think it's critical. I think it's critical you have Spanish. And the reason why basically is that when you're investing in the marketing, even if you don't have anybody in your law firm that actually speaks Spanish, you want to capitalize on the investment in marketing, and you should have a partnership with a law firm down the street or in your area that does speak Spanish, and you should be getting referral money to pay for that marketing. At the very least, you should have that program in place. If you cannot do that, you could actually transfer the call into our system, and we would speak Spanish to them. But I think it's absolutely critical at the minimum that you have a Spanish solution. Speaking solution within your law firm, even if it's outsourced, especially today. I think it's super critical.
All right, thanks.
Now, the other thing is, do you understand intake versus marketing cost realities? Now, the reason we're bringing this up is because we have found in most firms when we start to work with them do not. And the reason why they do not is because they're not really sure. They may say, hey, we don't want to hire other communications because we don't want to pay your cost. But the key basically is understanding what true cost is, all right? So here's an example of intake cost versus marketing spend. This is assigned client cost, which you guys might say is the cost per acquisition of a client. Now, this is kind of typically what it looks like. 85 to 90% of the budget to actually get that client to spend on marketing, and 10 to 15% to spend on intake. So here's an example. I'm going to put this now. I'm actually just going to show you. I couldn't do all the examples that are out there, but this would actually be something that costs $3,000 to get a case. And the marketing cost is going to be $2,600 to $2,750, and the intake retainer cost is $250 to $400. But if the lead is lost by bad intake, you are out the $2,700 marketing cost. So for you not to focus on intake and just spin through marketing doesn't make sense to not button this up, because it's so expensive marketing is in the legal world. And in competitive markets in Los Angeles and any city you're in, I don't care if it's Boston or New York or Miami or Kansas City or San Francisco, it's so expensive to get leads that you do not want to fumble the lead because of bad intake, because you have to spend more on marketing, which is a bigger piece of the pie. So do you understand cost versus true cost? I just hope this pie at some point here that we're putting in front of you kind of gives you an idea of, wow, we should be focusing way more on intake, because maybe we could spend less on marketing to get the same results, which, by the way, is always the truth if you button this up. So do you understand the cost physics between intake and marketing? And what I mean by that is physics, like the laws of physics, are absolute. I don't care if you're traveling to the moon or in this situation. If you have poor intake, you have to spend more on marketing to get the same result. And marketing costs more than intake. That's the physics. And to try to avoid that conversation, to spend more on marketing to spend through it, is not wise business sense. All right? And hopefully now this sheds some light on why intake is so critical, even on the financial side. So do you see intake as critical to control marketing costs and success? Or do you look at it as some sort of ancillary business and I'm just focusing on marketing? And that's why we're having this conversation. Think about it. This is something you should fix. So who are you marketing for? Now, Bob brought this question up before because it was asked, but poor intake leads to marketing for other law firms. Number one, marketing spends increasing, lower return on investment, and a higher cost per acquisition for every client. And then we see this all the time, blaming marketing for what really is bad intake. Now, some of the clients that we have, just so you know, we work for a lot of legal marketing agencies that are bringing us in as either partners because of the fact they are getting blamed for their leads not being good, when really it's not that. They know it's the law firm because they're listening to the calls and how slow response is. It also leads, obviously, to lower case retention, so you don't have as many clients, and also lower quality and a higher case fallout, because people may be getting signed or getting to them too late, or it's just nothing really works as well when poor intake is actually in play. And also wasted internal resources. How many wasted internal resources are used chasing leads that are already too old, that other law firms are already talking to, versus chasing a fresh lead? All right, it actually adds up to hundreds and thousands of hours for law firms, as well as having staff that become non-productive because of it. So who are you marketing for? And the only way to know that is to really be on top of your intake and have all the numbers in front of you. And then the answer should always be, I'm marketing for our law firm, and if we fumble, we know it. And if we don't fumble, then we're going to do our very best, and we're going to give it our very best shot when we talk to these clients on the phone, potential clients. So does your intake improve marketing return on investment or hurt it? So intake really should drive higher conversions. And then what you should have is controlled and measured marketing costs, because your intake really just rocks. You have a sales department, an intake department, and intake managers that know what they're doing. And you now know your marketing return on investment, and now you can match the marketing spends up with the leads all flowing to you and say, out of all these leads we got, we converted this, and plus marketing, it's costing this much per client. And with intake dialed in, it'll be at the very lowest possible. Then you can adjust your marketing in all those channels to see what you do. But just to try to find a bunch of different channels without fixing marketing, you're just throwing money to the wind and hoping you'll actually get some. And by the way, we see tons of successful law firms that have poor marketing. Poor marketing and poor intake, but also they can have great marketing and have poor intake and still be successful financially. But you can be far more successful and far more on top of your game if you control the intake side and your sales department. So lower cost per acquisition with great intake, and you free up marketing budgets, and you can scale a lot better when you have control of all these numbers. So scaling your law firm really requires you to be on top of intake, and if you cannot be, consider outsourcing that to make sure you are. So let's talk about qualifying leads, screening criteria on the intake itself. is your intake scripting built correctly? Now, this is actually one of the hardest things we talk about. People ask us all the time, hey, we don't even know where to start. And first thing I'm going to say is that, I would say that we have hundreds of intake screening criteria examples here that we give to law firms and say, hey, this is a sample. This is what we know that works, but if you'd like to edit it and ask questions, take questions away, or add a little bit of a tweak to it, or even a big tweak to it, go ahead. And then give it back to us, and then we'll coach you on the intake and what really works to make you to get the higher conversions. In certain practice types, like either class actions or multi-district litigations or personal injury, you have an intake screening criteria that may be used. For example, on Roundup or talcum powder, or on something else that you may be doing like Zantac. And in pre-litigation, the intake actually is looser criteria. It's wide open, and you get more cases. But as the litigation goes on and knowledge grows, that intake actually tightens up, and you have to be ready to tighten that intake up, and we do this all the time. We're actually all of a sudden now it's gotten tighter as there's knowledge, and we're trying to get more and more medical questions into that intake to screen better. That ongoing knowledge drives the intake criteria, and then in late state litigation, even in the settlement phases, it's much tighter screening criteria. There's new class reps or new people coming into the mass torts basically that are signing up right there. It's very close to trial dates or settlement phases, and you're trying to get as much data as possible to build that docket that can be submitted and negotiated right away. But you have to be nimble. And are you nimble? And do you know how to change these? This is another thing that we coach and provide help on as well. Now let's go ahead, Bob.
No, actually, I just wanted to remind a number of people have come in over the last half hour. I just want to remind listeners that there is this Q&A box here in the lower left-hand corner of your platform, and if you have questions, go ahead and put them in there. We will be getting to them near the end of the program and taking some as they come up as well. So go ahead and submit questions. That was it. Go ahead, Tom.
All right, perfect. So converting qualified leads to clients on the initial contact. To do this, you really need the ability with both expert intake agents and software systems. You can't have really one without the other. They work together. Our systems are pretty robust here, but we have a pretty big technical staff. This place looks more like Google than a call center if you walk in here, and it's built only around the legal field. But this is not the simplest thing to do. But let's talk about how you can do that. So, is your intake team and process well designed? So the first thing is that you must hire or staff with personnel who are trained, personable, and available with proper intake management. So you have to have the good staff, you have to have good training, and you have to have good intake management. This is the core piece. This is actually a really good question to ask yourself right now. Do we even have that? If I don't have that, maybe I need to outsource to get it. And then you need to outline and document intake processes in detail. And what I mean by that is so many different law firms that we talk to have very different litigations or practice types within the law firm. And you need to have a different intake process for each practice type. So let's say you were a law firm that had personal injury and you had criminal law and you also had immigration. Well, those intake processes for all of those and how you talk to those people and what you need from them is different to qualify them. And you need to have that detail, and then that needs to be pushed into your team, and they need to be following that all the time, and then be managed and monitored. And you need consistent 24/7 intake hours and offer a variety of methods to contact that all feed into one place. What that means is that people can reach you by chat, by phone, by website forums, whatever, other landing pages, marketing landing pages. And that all feed into one system, one software system, so all the data goes in one place so you know how many leads you have coming in and how they're being responded to, and it's all being measured. And who's actually doing that. And you need to employ this technology to streamline the process and to create accountability back to the staff, back to the intake managers. There has to be accountability there. This was where we see, again, so many protective silos in law firms where people are protecting and not being accountable. But really, I just wanted to say this to law firms. There's so many people on the call here today, is that this is not easy to do what we're talking about. Remember, we are a large firm. We have 450 people here just doing this all day long, and this is all we do all day long. And for us, it's not easy. In fact, we used to be a call center where we actually serviced every type of business in the nation. And 8 years ago, we said, look, we can't have our people multitasking. If they're talking to legal people, that's what they need to do. And we actually sold off that entire business, and we only do law. For you to make this happen, it's one thing to make this practice happen for yourself. I'm going to say this to you, and make it work during the day when you're open, from let's say 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever you're open. It is a whole different animal to make this work after hours, weekends, and holidays, and make this work, especially with turnover, especially with people being accountable, especially with COVID-19. Very difficult. So remember the last phase here: measure, monitor, report, optimize over time. Constant management over this group. This is what controls your spend, and it controls your marketing, it controls your revenue flow into your company. So is your intake team and process well designed? Well, ask yourself that question, and maybe we could help you with that design. Is your goal for initial intake call to disqualify or convert? This is also a huge question. So many law firms don't even have a goal that's clear to their intake team when the calls come in. This is what your goal should be. I'm going to disqualify this client, or I'm going to convert this client. Now, convert can mean you convert them to a signed client, or convert them into an appointment to the appropriate person to call, or you warm transfer them. But either way, you need to qualify them, disqualify them, or convert them. So be responsive and build rapport with a structured intake, but maintain call control, because remember, call control helps you qualify or disqualify. Then qualify or disqualify the lead is just a step. That's what you're doing. I want to qualify or disqualify. That's why it's so important to have a process that you always stick to. For qualified leads, do not break contact to send retainer. So if you have a fee agreement that you have the ability to send on the very first call, which you need to have, you want to stay on the call. You want to send them that fee agreement without breaking contact. As soon as you break contact in the sales world, which is part of the intake world, even though we don't call it in a law firm, we're just going to call it intake, you never want to break contact when you have a potential client on the phone. If you have the ability to convert them when you're on the phone, then you move that retainer to them, or fee agreement, or whatever your agreement is. You explain that to them, and they have the ability to e-sign that on the spot, which means you need software to do that. Remember, the number one highest conversions in all of this world come from texting retainers for e-sign. Shows up on their cell phone. They scroll down, sign it with their thumb. The second highest conversions, and we have all this data from millions of intakes that we do per year, emailing retainers for e-sign would be second to texting. The third would be either an office appointment or meeting with them at their location, or mailing retainers for those not technically savvy. But you have to have a follow-up system too. You just don't want to mail something and forget about it. And then you schedule follow-up meetings as necessary at the end of those processes to make sure that client doesn't get off the call wondering what's going to happen next. It's super clear to the client that after this call ends, even if you've signed them as a client, they know what's going to happen next, so they're comfortable. That's the customer service you have to move to at that level. So do you have a follow-up system for converting qualified leads, and are you using a good software system? So what do you do if your lead doesn't convert on the first call? Well, what software system are you using to track these leads? You have to have something in place to do that. That can't just be pieces of paper on your desk. What system do you have to schedule and automate follow-up tasks, meaning it's reminders to either, and you text them and email them through those systems automatically, or you basically, it notifies you it's time to make a live call. And do you vary the time of follow-up for after hours and weekends? And a reason why we say that is so many of the web leads we get for so many law firms, we reach, if they come in at 10 a.m. in the morning, we can't reach them all day. Our system is tasked to call them at 6 or 7 at night, and even on the weekends, because we reach so many people during those times that couldn't talk during the day because they submitted a form during work hours. So how do you contact them? Do you contact them by text, like does an automated text go out as soon as a web lead hits? How about outbound calls? How many times do you do that? And how about emails? So often when we actually work with people, we put together a cadence. Let's say it's a motor vehicle accident lead. I'm not just going to talk about personal injury all the time because we deal with family law and immigration and so forth. But would you like us to try to reach them 2 times a day or 3 times a day for 5 days or 7 days? Or 14 days, and then the mass tort will just, sometimes it's 2 times a day for 30 days. Just giving you some of the cadences that we are on. And each one of those reach outs until we get them on the phone. We could get them on the phone the first time, but understand the chance of you reaching them on the first time on the call is 37 to 40% time. And then that means you have 60% of your leads that need to be tracked and follow up. And you have to have an option for mailing packets that are sent but not signed to track them and follow up on those. And your software integration, tracking, automatic tasking, varied time reaches, all of that equals conversions for you. And this is why so many law firms have a hard time with this, is because you have to have somebody that can manage your software as well as a robust intake team to make sure your marketing spends are lower. But it saves lots of money to do this the right way.
Tom, we had a question exactly on that point. Of somebody had asked how many follow-ups does it take before finally giving up on a lead. It sounds like what you're saying is kind of a lawyer's answer of it depends. It depends on the practice. It depends on a number of other factors.
It does, but I'll just tell you what we think is the basic response. 2 times a day for 7 days, and the reason why that logic exists, and we've actually found with the numbers working here, is that you want to make sure you pass through a weekend. We reach so many people on the weekend that you don't reach during the week. So 2 times a day, and you want the time during the nighttime to be after hours and the time during the day to alternate a little bit. So you might want to call it 10 a.m. one day and then 1 p.m. the next day if you don't reach them. And you want to try to reach them by text, and you want to reach them by emails and by phone calls. You don't have to leave multiple voice messages. You can only leave one of those, but you still want to try those. But we would say 2 times a day for 7 days for almost every practice until you reach them. You might reach them on the third try.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. So reporting, this is what you need to be seeing within a law firm on the operations side. It's daily, weekly, monthly for daily leads and campaigns, callers received, web chat response times, calls placed, calls by marketing source. So unique phone numbers if you have different marketing campaigns going out, how many calls are coming inbound, and what's happening to all those leads. The duration is of the call, so you can see if that needs to be shortened or lengthened or if the intake is working for you. The call outcomes, and then lead intake notes, the trends in leads, trends in lead quality by source, and trends in the intake staff, because if you don't measure your intake staff, that actually could be the problem you're having, and it could be your staff, because not everybody's built to be in legal intake. So it's robust reporting as well. This is actually kind of a report that just shows, this was actually a roundup mass tort that kind of showed how many leads came in, the total retainers that were sent, and how many were signed, and also per day and the total roll-up of the campaign. But if you look at all these statuses below here, those are kind of like what you want to be seeing. So you are very clear in every single lead what's going on and what the follow-up process is. Does it need to be this detailed? For some law firms, I would say no, but I want you to know that it can be this detailed, and we do have these samples to give you these type of reports, but there are a lot of softwares that actually can create these type of reports for you out there. And it's good for you to have because it'll start giving you insight into what's working and not working and stuff you may be able to follow up with as well. Are you integrated? So when you think about integration, what I mean by that is that if you're receiving chats and somebody is and you're getting a chat lead coming into your office, that should be integrated into your software as well, so all those leads are flowing. But it's not just chat. And we integrate with some of these chat companies here, and some of them have Live Connect for chat, which means that they're actually the first responder is the chat company. 2 of those here are Engage and Apex, and what they basically do is that if a chat comes in and they're talking to them on the phone, and they'd like to talk to somebody like the law firm right now, and it's 10 p.m. at night, the phone will ring into the potential client's phone, and it will actually ring into us, and they'll go from chat to live intake. That's a different form of integration. But also, you need to be clear on where those leads are going, so it's not just a chat that disappeared and went where. All the web forms you have, all the landing pages, and all the advertisements, all that flow needs to be measured. And when those are posting, who's measuring that within your law firm and getting that data, and then looking at the intake on that and how that's being handled for the conversions. Because you need to find out really what's working and not working. And either marketing can work or not work, or you have to adjust it, or intake may not be working, and that's something you have to address permanently within your law firm or requires training. And then also you may have things that's a third point where you're integrated out to, let's say, medical records. And as soon as a lead comes into you, then you want to actually qualify them. And once they're qualified and they're signed up, it's integrated to go straight out to your medical records company actually, so they do that. And that's all being tracked as well. So there's a lot of things to integrate, but nothing gets lost this way. Otherwise, it becomes frustrating as things don't move along in the litigation. So when you talk about CRM or case management integrations, really all sources, calls, web forms, email, social media, chat, and then you export and post that in email intake. After we finish just, legal intake, generally what we do for law firms is that the intake questions, the lead contact data, all the questions and answers are immediately sent by email directly to one or more people in the law firm so they can see it happen live right after the call terminates. And then when it's terminated, basically, it also can post into their CRM or case management system if they want us to as well. But they're getting it two ways, going into their system and that way. But we work with people on what they want here, and then we just talk to them about what can work best. And then Alert integrates basically to all CRMs, case management softwares. We use your fee agreements. We use HIPAA and high-tech forms. We use medical reviews and records. And we can also do follow-up documents for any practice type. We can email those out if there's a questionnaire. It might be an employment law firm, and they may say, hey, before we're going to qualify them, we've got through the first 7, 8 questions here. It looks like they're okay, but send out this questionnaire because they need to send this back before we can actually take them on as a case, which we see a lot as well. So the other question I think that you must ask yourself when you think about all these things we talked about today is COVID-19 hurting your intake? And do you need help? And I'm saying that because in February we had to make a decision. And we had to take 450 people and push them home. And it took a huge undertaking to get them home and security. We did it in about 35, 40 days. And we did it under an emergency status at our place to make sure that, because we just knew one person that came in and got COVID-19, we quarantined 450 people, and we'd shut our business down across then. But for you, it's difficult because now you have people working at home, spread out. And if it's hurting your business, this might be the perfect time for you to consider outsourcing to solve your problems because it's so hard to manage people at home. And then if you're dealing with any type of secure conversations or secure anything with them, can you even be secure and do that? And if you can't be secure, you have to think about, data breaches for law firms is at a record high. The American Bar Association did that. And if you can't do that, this might be a time where you need help and have to alternate how you practice. So why should you partner with an outsourced intake provider? Well, you want to meet or exceed new customer expectations, which are really created by these big companies now. You got to start matching. This is what consumers expect. Improve lead response times and limit lead losses to increase your return on investment of all marketing efforts. Improve appointment numbers and sign clients. Build a positive brand experience and better reviews to help build your SEO for your site. Cover overflow, after hours, emergencies, or absences. Gain more referrals from being responsive. Obtain customer service excellence. Drive law firm revenue and scale. When you actually manage intake, you can now drive revenue like you've never seen before. We've had law firms basically come to us and they had 9 intake people on their team. And after using this for overflow, they don't have an intake team actually. Not that we're recommending that you do that. We became their intake team, but now they can spend as much as they want on marketing because they know that they have as much bandwidth as they need to respond to the leads. So you can scale wherever you want to go. And you can also use outsourcing to navigate COVID-19 impacts. So those are things to really think about. So conclusion. That was a lot to talk about. And by the way, this is really just a macro view. We'd be happy to consult with anybody, just walk them through. It's free of charge to do this. But let's just talk about a couple things here. Remember this. Is this a conclusion now that you learned this information or a new beginning for you? The key is to be the best and dominate your market, not market for other law firms because you don't have intake put together. Remember these two things. The first responder with the very best intake wins. And this always results in the highest conversions and really drives the most revenue to your law firm. That requires swift response times, expert intake specialists, and solid technology systems that are required. So ask yourself, can you do this all in-house 24/7? If honestly the answer is no, then outsource to a strong 24/7 intake support center for the highest conversions. And that really kind of wraps up. These are some common questions that will be sent out with our presentation. About how we help law firms in the meantime. But I think that, we're not going to cover this right now just because I think we want to allow some time for questions here. Bob, do we have some questions?
We do have a couple of questions here, Tom, and one of them is one I bet a number of people might be asking, but it's a question of what is the best order of operations to take a small 4-attorney firm from an old-fashioned office person and talk to the lawyer before scheduling mentality to a true intake and scheduling set of processes. Cost will be a huge factor, and savings efficiently really need to be obvious soon after adoption of the old ways will return. So really, how does a firm that's still sort of mired in the old ways of handling intake get started down this path, and how quickly can they see some benefit from it?
Well, it's a great question, because we get asked this almost in every call that we talk to people in our first consultation, and we kind of go through a discovery process with a law firm. And I think that the answer to the question is that you take baby steps, and the first thing you want to do is figure out where are the biggest problems that you have within the law firm. So let's say you have an intake team right now, or you don't. It's just the calls or the leads are coming into your receptionist or people within the law firm, and you're responding as you do. I think the first thing you do is say, okay, look at how do we speed that up? And if we can't speed it up internally, how do we outsource this to cover those pieces? And let's not change anything. Let's leave our people here right now, bring in an outsourced person basically to cover the overflow. So after 3 rings, now instead of it actually just ringing on or ringing through to all the people in our law firm, have that overflow to somebody that actually handles that call for us and then gets that information back to us. And at the end of the call, they're either going to set an appointment for us to call them back, or they're basically going to warm transfer to one of us after they've actually done their qualification, or what they're going to basically do is set an appointment, or they're going to sign them up, okay, for us, depending on what your practice type is. But you look at, okay, I'm going to cover just to make sure we are answering calls as fast as we can and nothing's ringing on, we're not losing leads. Second of all, you have to decide, how many calls am I getting and how many web leads am I getting. How you respond to web leads is a whole different situation. I actually think in some ways that's the most technical thing for law firms to try to figure out. And really they may want to decide, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have, let's say somebody like us, like Alert, come in and handle overflow, after hours, weekends and holidays to start. We're going to learn from what they do here to see how we can implement that. And then on web leads, they either handle the web leads 24/7 because we're so much faster, or we bring in software to actually respond to the web leads, like we can instantly text them and make phone calls, or we have somebody like us take those calls and respond to do quicker. But you take just those first pieces. But secondly, I think you need to kind of walk through. We go through about 19 or 20 features that we have, and we ask what you have, what you don't have. And it becomes really apparent about where you need help, because not every law firm is the same. In fact, I feel like I never have the same conversation over, except for people needing help. But that's where you want to start, is like, where can I fix where we know we're actually bleeding the most in the law firm leads? Or if we don't know, we should patch it just to make sure, because then we'll have the data. And after running that program for a month or two, we'll have all the data of all the stuff that you actually, after hours and overflow and every call we took, and it'll be enlightening to you. You'll have data now to say, oh, wow, after 3 rings, you guys ended up taking 75 calls last month. We don't know what would have happened after 3 rings if we would have lost 20 or 30 of those calls. But at least you'll have data to know where to go from there. And then at that point, you can say, do I want to build an intake team out? For us, you pay for us as you use us. For you, if you build an intake team, whether they're working or not, you're paying for them. And it's hard not to make them multitask and make them valuable, which is also expensive. So you kind of have to decide that. But I think the very first phase is having a discovery audit about where you're at in your law firm, and then coming up with a plan that is mutually agreeable. Sounds simple, but it's really the very best step. And then it'll make, because it makes sense to go down that. So one step at a time.
Yeah, very helpful. Another question that somebody asked actually kind of earlier on in the program, but with regard to the intake process, the question is, with a very diversified, fact-specific form in commercial litigation, what is an optimal degree of question and answer to drive successful intake? So I guess the question is essentially, how much is too much, or how little is too little?
No, that's a great question. We actually get intakes from law firms they want us to use sometimes, and frankly, the intake takes 45 minutes to go through, and you actually drop conversions by doing that. I think the average intake, should be somewhere between 8 minutes and 20 minutes long for most litigations that actually require questions. But I think that you can have, what we do is we bump all the disqualifying questions to the front of the intake. So you're not spending time talking about, where something happened or what happened versus them being qualified or not. So statute of limitations, how it was involved. So you need to get the disqualifiers front, because once they're disqualified as a client, the rest of the conversation is shortened. So the design of that intake. This is what I talk about intake coaching. The design of that intake is really more critical in how many questions you have, because you could have 30 questions, and every single question strengthen that person as being a client, and it take 45 minutes, and it be okay. But it's not okay if you're asking the disqualifiers at the end of the intake. So I would say, though, that most intakes we do are somewhere between 8 minutes for the most basic ones, to, I would say 20 minutes in that thing. Then you have to allow time, if you're trying to retain them on the phone, another 8 to 12 minutes to walk through the retainer if they're going to e-sign it on top of that. So, which is a whole different process, because you may or may not want to do that in the very first call.
Right. This goes back to the conversation earlier about cadence, and to some extent you addressed this, but the question is, what is the average cadence your team attempts before a successful conversion? How do you determine? And I think you said before the average cadence is 2 times a day for 7 days. But what about that other part of that question? How do you determine that, and does it differ for different kinds of practices?
Yeah, it really makes a big difference, I think, for different types of practices. Okay. I think that it's different for family law. For family law, basically, most people that call family law attorneys expect them to be open from normal 9 to 5, and that's where they're at. And that cadence could be even just 1. Okay. Not so for immigration, criminal, or personal injury. I think that those really, a lot of times there's some level of desperation involved in the caller or the lead that's coming in. And I would recommend in those that it's a minimum of 2 times a day for 7 days. And the logic behind that is just really the nights and the weekends, making sure you pass through a weekend to see if you can reach them. However, I will tell you, on litigations that have high dollar values that are out there, and I mean that we see this a lot in the mass tort world or even class action world, sometimes we're involved at 2 or 3 times a day on a lead that's flowing in, let's say specifically a web lead, because obviously calls, you're just answering the calls that comes in. And that would go on for 2 weeks and sometimes up to 30 days because the value of the litigation is so critical. And because as the litigations go on and you get closer to settlement phases and late stage litigations, the cost of the leads are so expensive, converting them, it becomes it's more expensive to not convert them than to convert them, if that makes sense. You want to spend as much effort as possible. So I think it really does matter on the litigation, and I think it really does matter on the practice type, and I think there's logic behind it for criminal lawyers, right? But also, you have to remember that when the phone's ringing, 24/7 response to pick up the phone is a big deal. That's what people expect if they call. So that requires really just digging into the litigation practice type and the law firm to really, but I would say 2 times a day for 7 days is a start.
All right. I don't see any other questions. I have a question. I don't know if you can give it's probably a long question, but maybe there's a quick answer you can give. But, there's a lot of services on the market, the call services, intake services, virtual receptionist services. If you're a law firm looking to hire a service in this area, what are some of the critical factors they should be looking at in the companies they're talking to?
I think a dedicated legal call center is significantly different. We have a lot of people move to us because of the fact that they've actually worked with other call centers, and the person that's the call agent working at that call center is taking a phone call to book a music, training appointment or a plumber or HVAC at somebody's house or a solar appointment. And then they go to handle a call for somebody that's just been, in a criminal case or actually personal injury or even family law. And it just doesn't work. I mean, if they're not in that legal mentality all the time and dealing with those type of calls all the time, the calls are just really subpar, and it just leads to the loss of leads. So the other thing I think, too, is 24/7. Call centers talk about being 24/7, but they really need to be 24/7 in this world, I believe. Also, are they bilingual? And are they technical savvy? I mean, and also, how long have they been in business? So many of these people have been in business for 2 or 3 years, and that's it. And we've been in business since 1965. And, we've been around for a long, long time. And And, I was born in 1965, so I know how old that is. So I can tell you that, being in business for a long time, even today, is critical. And then operationally, do they have the bandwidth even in the call center? So a dedicated service, 24/7, bilingual, and what is their own bandwidth? And if you're going to a call center, how do they handle that? And then how robust are they technically to help you? Can all the stuff that we're talking about, can they even do that for you? They have to be able to do that for you. So there's a lot to look at there. But it's a great question because there's a lot to, there's a lot of things. We actually have a questionnaire I'd be happy to send to people about questions. And it's a very long questionnaire that if you guys ever want to take a look at it, you can read the questions. And really, all those questions are things you can ask, and very few call centers that I even know about, if any, can even do it. But it's something you should be doing inside your office. If you can't do it in your office, then the person you give it to outside your office should be able to do it. And so we'd be happy to provide that too. Just reach out to me.
Great. Well, just a reminder again to listeners that the recording of this webinar will be available at the same link that you used to log in today for, I think, a year from now. So you've got plenty of time to come back and visit it. And in addition, Alert Communications will be following up with an email with the presentation, the slides that you saw today. And you can see Tom's email address and phone number right there on your screen if you want to follow up with him. Tom, that was really interesting. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Great. And thanks to all of you for attending and staying with us for this time. And that will conclude today's webinar. Thanks for listening.